the most recent modern memory, at least for our parents' generation, was Vietnam being broadcast on the television for the first time, and people actually seeing the horrors of war. And there was this huge counterculture movement that happened alongside that. And it seems like there really was this realization that media was going to transform everything. And yeah, like you said, the trauma of just being able to open your phone while you're in line at the grocery store and see, that 30,000 people died in an earthquake in Syria this morning or whatever. It's just almost unbearable to some extent. And the interesting thing is that we have less of like a communal spiritual anchor than we've ever had before at the same time, because the news stories don't really tell you how you should feel about it or like how you should process it or what the meaning in it is necessarily. They're just like, look, terrible stuff's happening. There you go.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, working as a professor, as you know, interfacing with the youth, right? People who are 20, 21. And I mean, as you know, the crisis of mental health for young people is very real as they're committing suicide, in record numbers. And so I think that we're at a point, we're talking about apocalypse, right? And we're talking about why do apocalyptic narratives continue and survive? Because because they still speak to us. If they didn't, we wouldn't have them. And so I think now what we see, so you and I talked about being in kind of rural areas and having the apocalyptic narrative a lot more real, I guess, than say in California. Well, not now. Like, if I go to California maybe 3 or 4 times a year. My family still lives in California. And every time I go, the apocalypse is a real thing there, because you have tent cities of homeless people and you have fentanyl. And, so really, I think that the people now where I live here in North Carolina, rural North Carolina, right? I think that they're thinking the apocalypse is all out there. And we're the ones who have to kind of maintain some level of sanity. That's how I feel living here.
100% how it is here too. 100%. That's
to some degree. I feel like there's 2 different levels of apocalypse, because there's the apocalypse of the cities, and then there's also this feeling in the countryside that the apocalypse will definitely come here. One of the first experiences that I had was when we were just looking to move here, we ended up at some dollar store in this town of, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 people. It's this little teeny tiny place. And I overheard these 2 women talking in the aisle next to me about how they were learning how to cook over open fires because they were sure that the electricity and the gas was going to get cut off because the people in the cities and the people in the urban areas were going to come get them.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's like, it feels like apocalypse plays out not just in the cities, and especially in San Francisco and in the tech world, there's a new apocalypse, right? So you had the apocalypse of the collapse of society, where you have these massive populations of homeless people in the cities that don't have the services they need. We have no idea how to deal with it. We lived in Portland. Portland's been slowly devoured by it. By all the best intentions, right? Everybody in those cities really wants to do the right thing.
San Francisco too. Now that you mention it, it's funny because I did have a little bit of an illusion that it was getting better, but I think it's just because we just visit a few times a year now to the city, and I just go in and see people and leave, and I'm not living across from
You're not living in the Tenderloin anymore. Yeah. But the point that I was trying to make was that in the cities, there's now a second apocalypse that's coming, especially in a place like San Francisco, which is the AI apocalypse.
Yes.
Which is that we started with GPT-4 coming out, and it's this improved model of GPT-3, and it's even better at answering questions, and it can pass all of these exams. Like, I think that I was looking at the GPT-4 announcement this morning, and GPT-3 passed the bar exam, but it was in the 10th percentile. GPT-4 is in the 90th percentile.
Right.
And there's still a couple of things that it can't do that well, but we're seeing gains so quickly that you see tech people becoming believers in the coming apocalypse. And I wonder if it's not a reflection that the technology that they've developed is going to destroy their craft specifically, because it seems like what they're doing is they're creating machines that will be better than they are at creating machine things. You'll be able to make better programs because you just tell the AI what it wants. You don't need a whole suite of programmers. You just have one computer program that does it. And so when I see all of these assessments of existential dread, I wonder if it isn't passed through the lens of a personal apocalypse being made into a complete apocalypse. And in the countryside as well, the apocalypse is personal. My way of life is under threat.
Yes. I think that for my next book, I focused on several, not just indigenous ideas about star nations and contact, but also people who create AI. And so I have, I would say, became friends with people who, early adopters of Bitcoin, early creators, things like this, right? I mean, people who are at the very beginning of this. And now they are, how do we put it? Religious about AI. So AI is in their view. And now I can't help but a lot of times what happens to me is when I get into these communities, I adopt the way of what they, I adopt these ideas. I think maybe that's helpful. I don't know. That remains to be seen. But I can tell you that the excitement at GPT-4 amongst these people is like, our Savior is here. And why? Why is that? Because this represents a huge evolutionary step. So there is now it's an apocalypse, but only for human beings. And some human beings will be able to branch into this other branch of Homo sapiens. Okay? So that's how it's being seen. And what's interesting is that if any of your, the people who are viewers and listeners and you, I don't know if you're aware of Ted Chiang's work. He does fiction and science fiction. He does short stories. And one of his stories was made into the movie Arrival, which is about UFOs. And I think it's called The Story of Your Life. But he also has this very short story that was published more than 20 years ago in Nature. And it's a fiction. It's a fiction. And it's only a 5-minute read, by the way. And it's called Crumbs from the Table. And it's basically, it's about metahumans and how it's literally about this branching off that I'm talking about between Homo sapiens and what he calls metahumans. And how what happened was metahumans were Homo sapiens who hacked into themselves and became a new branch of humans. And they live side by side, kind of how Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived side by side. And then Neanderthals just, disappeared. I think that's what they're thinking is happening at this very moment.